I built my life on structure. Every morning began the same way. I woke before sunrise, before the city's noise reached the windows. I preferred the quiet. It reminded me that control begins in silence. The house would still be dark when I stepped onto the balcony. From there, I could see the skyline stretching into a gray horizon. That view had cost me years of discipline, patience, and choices most men would not survive. Inside the house, everything moved with order. The staff followed schedules that never changed. Breakfast was placed at the table at exactly 7. Security rotations shifted without discussion. Cameras were monitored in a separate wing of the property. Nothing was left to chance. I did not believe in luck. I believed in systems. My wife often joined me at breakfast. She was calm, measured, always composed. She understood the value of appearances. In public, we were balanced. Private conversations were quiet and efficient. We did not argue. We did not raise our voices. Problems were addressed logically. At least that was what I believed. I trusted her, not blindly. I do not trust blindly, but I trusted her role in my life. She handled social obligations, charity events, and the softer side of our reputation. People saw elegance when they looked at her. They did not see strategy. I respected that about her. The maid had been with us for 3 years. She was almost invisible in the way efficient staff should be. She cleaned without drawing attention, moved through hallways without sound, and rarely spoke unless spoken to. I valued that. In my world, silence is loyalty. I rarely returned home early. My work required unpredictability. Meetings shifted. Travel changed without notice. My absence created stability. When I was away, the house operated under rules already established. I assumed those rules were enough. At night, when I finally returned, the lights were always adjusted to a softer tone. My study would be prepared, documents placed neatly, whiskey poured if I requested it. The routine felt reassuring, predictable. That predictability became my definition of trust. I believed that fear protected me outside these walls. Respect protected me inside them. No one would risk disturbing the balance I created. There were consequences for disloyalty in my world, and everyone understood that. I never questioned my authority in business, and I never questioned my security at home. That was my mistake. Because power, when left unquestioned, becomes assumption. And assumption is the quietest weakness a man like me can have. For years, nothing seemed out of place. No raised voices, no visible cracks. The house functioned like a machine built for precision. I mistook smooth operation for loyalty. I did not realize that silence can hide many things. Looking back, the signs were not dramatic. They were small, quiet, easy to dismiss. My wife began taking more calls in private. That alone meant nothing. Our lives required discretion. Conversations happened behind closed doors all the time, but I noticed she started stepping onto the terrace when her phone rang at night. The doors would slide shut softly. Her voice would lower. When I asked who it was, she answered without hesitation. Charity committees, event planners, overseas partners. Her explanations were logical, calm. She never appeared defensive. I told myself I was imagining tension where there was none. Then there were the schedule adjustments. I maintain access to every calendar connected to this house. Security rotations, staff shifts, driver assignments. It is habit. I glanced at the system one evening and noticed 2 minor changes approved under my authorization code. I had not approved them. The alterations were harmless. A driver dismissed early. A guard rotation delayed by 30 minutes. Nothing that would threaten my safety. When I questioned my head of security, he apologized and blamed a clerical overlap. He appeared embarrassed, not fearful. I let it go. The maid began avoiding my gaze. That detail stayed with me longer than it should have. She had always maintained a neutral posture, eyes lowered respectfully, movements efficient. But recently, when I entered a room unexpectedly, she would stiffen. Once, I saw her quickly exit the study hallway when she thought I was not watching. I assumed she feared displeasing me. Fear is common in my presence. I am accustomed to it, but this felt different. It was not fear of punishment. It looked like fear of discovery. One evening, I walked into the kitchen after midnight. The lights were on. She was standing near the sink, hands resting on the counter, staring at nothing. She did not hear me approach. When she noticed me, she flinched. "I couldn't sleep," she said before I asked anything. I had not accused her. Her voice carried tension, as if she were rehearsing an explanation for something larger. I studied her for a moment, then nodded and left. Again, I dismissed it. There were gaps in the security footage, short ones. A few minutes missing from a hallway camera, a temporary glitch in the internal recording system. My technicians assured me it was a hardware issue. They offered to replace the unit. I approved it without further inspection. In my world, serious threats are loud. They arrive with force or negotiation. They do not hide in minor technical errors. That belief made me careless. Even at dinner, subtle changes appeared. My wife asked more questions about my travel schedule, not casually, precisely. What time I would return, which route I preferred, whether meetings might extend. I answered without suspicion. After all, she was my wife. Trust, when built over years, does not collapse over small discomforts. It resists doubt. It defends stability. But discomfort, when repeated quietly, begins to gather weight. I felt it. I simply chose not to examine it. The first moment I could no longer ignore happened on a Thursday. I returned from a meeting earlier than expected, not as early as that final night, but early enough to disrupt routine. As I walked past my study, I noticed the door was locked. That door is never locked. There is no reason to lock it. The only people who enter that room are myself and occasionally my wife when we host private guests. Even then, the door remains open. Transparency inside my home has always been part of my control. I stood there for a full minute, staring at the handle. When it finally opened, my wife stepped out. Her expression did not change when she saw me. Calm, balanced. "I was reviewing donation paperwork," she said. She did not appear flustered. She did not rush. That steadiness almost convinced me. Almost. Inside, the desk was slightly rearranged. A folder had been moved from the left side to the right. My chair had been adjusted lower than I usually keep it. These were small details, but I noticed small details. My life depends on noticing them. I asked if anyone else had entered the room. "No," she replied. "Why would they?" Her tone carried mild confusion, not irritation. She turned the question back toward me, gently suggesting that the idea itself was unreasonable. I did not push further. A week later, my personal driver was dismissed. He had worked with me for 6 years, loyal, efficient. He never asked unnecessary questions. I was informed that he had requested leave due to family matters. He never contacted me directly. When I inquired, my wife said she had spoken to him herself. She claimed he seemed distracted and unstable. She recommended letting him go for security reasons. Security reasons. The phrase was carefully chosen. I accepted it publicly. Privately, I began checking financial records more closely. There were minor transfers authorized from a secondary account, funds allocated for operational flexibility. The amounts were not large enough to trigger alerts. They were spaced out over weeks. Each transaction carried proper authorization codes. My codes. I confronted my financial officer discreetly. He insisted everything had been approved through internal channels. He showed me digital confirmations. Timestamps matched evenings I had been traveling. The system indicated I had authorized them remotely. I knew I had not. Still, I said nothing. Then came the whispering. Twice, I walked into rooms where conversation stopped mid-sentence. Staff members lowered their eyes more quickly than usual, not in respect, but in avoidance. Power creates silence, but this silence felt coordinated. The maid avoided my presence more deliberately now. Once, as I passed her in the hallway, I heard her breathing change. It was shallow, uneven, not fear of me, fear of something else. Patterns were forming, locked doors, missing footage, adjusted schedules, dismissed staff, unauthorized funds. Each incident alone could be explained. Together, they suggested something structured, something intentional. For the first time, I allowed a thought to fully form. Someone inside my house was using my own systems against me, and I did not yet know who was leading it. The first time I tried to address my concerns directly, I chose my words carefully. We were sitting across from each other at dinner. The table was set the way it always was, measured distance between plates, glasses aligned perfectly, candles placed symmetrically. Everything looked controlled. I asked about the financial transfers. Not accusing, just precise. She did not react immediately. She took a sip of water, placed the glass down gently, and looked at me with what appeared to be concern. "You approved those," she said. "You were traveling, you might not remember." The suggestion was subtle, might not remember. I explained that I track my authorizations closely, that I would not forget approving repeated transfers. She leaned back slightly. "You've been under pressure," she continued calmly. "You barely sleep. Sometimes you sign things without noticing. It happens." Her tone was not defensive. It was sympathetic. That unsettled me more than denial would have. The next day, I questioned the security footage gaps. My head of security assured me the system had malfunctioned. He mentioned that my wife had already approved maintenance on my behalf because she did not want to disturb me during an important meeting. On my behalf. The pattern repeated. Whenever I identified an inconsistency, she had an explanation ready. Logical, structured, reasonable. If I pressed further, her expression shifted, not to anger but disappointment. "You don't trust me," she asked one evening when I brought up the locked study again. The question reframed everything. It made me the aggressor. I answered that trust requires clarity. She responded that constant suspicion erodes relationships. Her voice remained level, controlled, almost patient. Gradually, others began mirroring her tone. My financial officer suggested I consider delegating more responsibilities. My security chief recommended rest. Even the house staff behaved as though I were becoming unpredictable. I felt it, the subtle shift in atmosphere. Conversations shortened when I entered rooms. Staff members watched my reactions carefully, not out of loyalty but assessment. One afternoon, my wife placed her hand lightly on my arm. "You're not yourself lately," she said. "You're seeing threats where there are none." There was no accusation in her voice, only concern. It would have been easier if she had shouted. Instead, she made doubt sound compassionate. For the first time in years, I questioned my own perception. Had I become too rigid, too suspicious? Was I interpreting normal adjustments as betrayal because control is the only language I understand? The house remained orderly. No dramatic events, no visible chaos, just quiet resistance whenever I asked questions. Gaslighting does not always arrive with cruelty. Sometimes it arrives with calm reassurance. And that is more dangerous, because it isolates you inside your own uncertainty. I began reviewing records alone at night, double-checking details I once trusted others to manage. I told no one. If I was wrong, I would correct myself silently. If I was right, I needed proof that could not be dismissed as paranoia. But the more I searched, the more carefully the system seemed designed to appear flawless. And that frightened me. The night I came home early, I did not intend to uncover anything. A meeting had ended ahead of schedule. The discussion was brief, efficient. No conflict. No warning. I decided not to inform anyone I was returning. It was a small impulse. I wanted to sit in my study alone before the house adjusted itself to my presence. When I entered, the gates opened without hesitation. The exterior guards looked surprised, but they recovered quickly. Inside, the air felt different. Not chaotic, not tense, prepared. The hallway lights were dimmed lower than usual. The sound system, which normally played soft instrumental music in the evenings, was off. Silence pressed against the walls. Then I saw the maid. She stood near the staircase, frozen when she noticed me. Her face had lost color. She did not greet me. She did not lower her eyes. She stepped forward slightly and whispered, "Don't make a sound." Her voice was barely audible, but it carried urgency I had never heard from her before. I did not ask why. I listened. From upstairs, I heard something faint. Not laughter, not shouting, just movement, a shift in weight. A floorboard responding to pressure. Someone was walking in my private wing. The part of the house restricted to myself and my wife. I looked at the maid. She shook her head almost imperceptibly, as if warning me not to react. That detail confirmed what weeks of discomfort had suggested. This was not random. I moved slowly toward the base of the staircase, placing each step carefully to avoid sound. Years of discipline made silence natural. The maid remained where she stood, her hands trembling at her sides. Halfway up the stairs, I noticed the security camera positioned at the landing. Its indicator light was off. It should never be off. I did not touch it. I did not call anyone. At the end of the hallway, the door to my study upstairs was slightly open. I heard a voice. Male, low, controlled, speaking in a measured tone I did not recognize. Then my wife responded. Her voice carried familiarity, not tension, not fear, comfort. They were not arguing. They were discussing something. Papers shifted. A drawer opened. I remained still. In that moment, the pieces aligned. Unauthorized financial transfers, adjusted schedules, dismissed driver, disabled cameras, gaslighting. This was not emotional impulsiveness. It was structured. I stepped closer until I could see through the narrow gap in the door. On my desk were documents, confidential records tied to operations no outsider should access. My wife stood beside a man I did not recognize. He was reviewing pages calmly as if he belonged there. They were not rushing. They believed they had time. The maid's whisper echoed in my mind. "Don't make a sound." For the first time, I understood her fear. This was not only betrayal, it was infiltration. And it had been happening inside my home. I did not enter the room. That decision surprised even me. Every instinct I have trained for years pushed toward confrontation. Immediate control. Immediate dominance, but something held me back. If I stepped inside too soon, they would adjust the narrative. I remained outside the door and listened. The man spoke in a calm, analytical tone. He referenced shipment routes, offshore holdings. He mentioned names that were not publicly connected to me, details only a small circle was aware of. My wife responded with precision. She clarified timelines, corrected minor inaccuracies. She was not being coerced. She was participating. There was no hesitation in her voice. That realization settled deeper than anger. This had not begun recently. You cannot discuss operational structure without preparation. You cannot answer questions like that without prior access. I stepped back from the door silently and glanced toward the camera at the hallway intersection. Its light remained off, disabled deliberately, not broken. The system logs I reviewed earlier in the week suddenly made sense. Gaps were not glitches. They were windows. Windows created intentionally. I descended the stairs without sound. The maid was still standing where I had left her. She looked at me as though waiting for a verdict. "How long?" I asked quietly. Her lips trembled. "Months." She kept her voice barely above a whisper. "Why tell me now?" Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. "Because tonight they were going to finish." "Finish what?" She swallowed. "Transfer access. Move everything before you return next week." Next week. My wife had insisted I extend my trip. She encouraged it gently, saying I needed rest. The structure revealed itself completely then. The dismissed driver had been replaced with someone loyal to her. Security rotations adjusted to create blind spots. Financial transfers tested in small amounts to avoid detection. Gradual isolation of my most trusted staff. This was not emotional betrayal. It was strategic. Upstairs, footsteps shifted. A chair moved. I imagined them reviewing final documents, confident that the house remained predictable, that I would return according to schedule, that the systems built in my name would protect them. I felt something colder than rage, humiliation, not because she stood beside another man, but because she believed I would never see it. I turned to the maid. "Does anyone else know I am here?" I asked. She shook her head. "Good. Escalation does not require noise. It requires timing." I walked toward the security office instead of the staircase. Quietly, methodically. If they wanted systems, I would use systems. No shouting, no spectacle, just correction. And when correction begins silently, it is far more frightening than anger. The security office was empty when I entered. It should not have been. There is always at least one operator monitoring internal feeds. Tonight, the chair was pushed slightly away from the desk, as if someone had stepped out temporarily. The monitors displayed exterior cameras only. Interior feeds were paused on static images, not disabled. Paused. Someone had planned for controlled absence. I did not call for anyone. I sat down slowly and accessed the main control terminal. My credentials still worked. That told me something important. They believed I was far away. The log history revealed manual overrides initiated from within the house. The timestamps aligned with my wife's late-night calls. Short intervals. Carefully chosen. Each override required dual authentication. One of them was hers. The other belonged to a senior systems manager I had trusted for years. My chest tightened, not with anger but with recognition. This was layered betrayal, not emotional chaos, not impulse, recruitment. I restored the paused interior feeds without triggering alerts. Years ago, I designed the system with a silent observation mode meant for external threats. I never imagined I would use it inside my own home. The upstairs camera reactivated quietly. On the screen, I saw them clearly. My wife stood near my desk. The man sat in my chair. He looked comfortable. They were reviewing what appeared to be digital access keys stored on a secure drive. She handed him something small, likely a physical authentication device. My device. She must have duplicated it. I watched without moving. The humiliation settled fully then, not because of intimacy, not because of another man's presence. Because she had studied me. She understood my habits, my blind spots, my reliance on order. She used predictability against me. That realization broke something internal. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. I remembered every time she suggested I rest, every gentle reminder that I should delegate more, every sympathetic look when I questioned minor irregularities. It had all been calibration. Gaslighting is not about making someone feel insane. It is about making them doubt their authority over their own perception. And she succeeded for months. I zoomed the camera slightly. Their conversation remained calm, focused, professional. There was no visible fear of consequences. That was the hardest part to accept. They believed I was manageable, replaceable. As I watched, the man inserted the drive into his laptop. Files began transferring, progress bar moving steadily. That was the moment I understood the cost. If this completed, not only would I lose leverage, but my network would fracture. External rivals would exploit weakness instantly. Loyalty outside these walls is transactional. It survives strength. Inside my own house, strength had been eroded quietly. I stood up from the chair, not to storm upstairs, but because clarity had replaced doubt. This was no longer suspicion. It was proof, and proof demands response. I did not rush. The file transfer upstairs was still in progress. The progress bar moved steadily across the screen. They believed they had time. I reached for my phone and made 3 calls, each one short, each one precise. The first call was to my external systems administrator, someone not embedded in the house. I instructed him to initiate a full remote lockdown of financial access points under my primary authority, not visibly, quietly. Freeze, not alert. The second call went to a private security unit stationed off-site. I told them to wait outside the property gates without entering. No sirens, no lights, just presence. The third call was to the senior systems manager whose authentication had appeared in the logs. He answered on the second ring. I did not accuse him. I simply asked where he was. At home, he replied. I asked him to check his email immediately. I informed him that all administrative privileges had been revoked pending an internal audit. His breathing changed. Silence is revealing. I don't understand, he said. You will, I replied and ended the call. Upstairs, the transfer bar reached completion. I watched as the man removed the drive and closed his laptop. My wife stood close beside him. They exchanged a look, not romantic, not hurried. Satisfied, I walked toward the staircase. Each step was deliberate, not slow, not fast. When I reached the hallway, I did not hesitate this time. I pushed the study door open fully. They both turned. Surprise is a quiet expression when people believe they are intelligent. My wife's face lost its color first. The man remained seated for half a second longer before standing. No one spoke. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. You're home early, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. Yes, I replied. The man attempted composure. This is a misunderstanding. I looked at him without emotion. You're using my chair. He stepped away immediately. I walked to the desk and picked up the authentication device she had handed him minutes earlier. It won't work anymore, I said calmly. My wife's eyes flickered. She understood. The accounts are frozen, access revoked. Your colleague downstairs has already been removed from his position. I watched comprehension settle into her expression. Not panic, not yet. You can't just, she began. I already did. No shouting, no threats. The man reached slowly for his laptop. I nodded toward it. Leave it. He hesitated. Now. He left it on the desk. The knock at the front door echoed faintly through the hallway as the external security unit entered the property. I had not ordered violence. I had ordered containment. I turned to my wife. For months, I said quietly, you studied my systems. She did not deny it. That was your mistake, I continued. You assumed I would not study them too. Her composure fractured then, not dramatically, but visibly. The confidence she carried dissolved into calculation. She realized the transfer she completed minutes ago had been redirected to a controlled mirror server the moment I restored internal surveillance. Nothing left this house tonight. Consequences do not need spectacle. They need timing. The house returned to silence. Not the silence of obedience or fear. Not the ordered quiet I once relied on. This was heavier, settled, reflective, and hollow. The maid resumed her duties with the same precision as before. She glanced at me occasionally, eyes lowered, but there was a trace of relief now. She had survived the storm and witnessed the restraint I practiced. No words were exchanged about the night's events. There was no celebration, no acknowledgement. The quiet itself was confirmation. My wife remained in the house, but her role had changed. I did not speak of betrayal or anger, no accusations, no confrontation beyond the facts that were already evident. She moved through the house differently, aware now of the distance between us, aware that trust had been irrevocably fractured. I returned to the study. The desk was neat, documents organized, systems restored, everything functioned as it should. Yet the order felt artificial now, stripped of the comfort it once gave me. I realized that control could manage operations, but it could not restore trust. That trust, once broken quietly and deliberately, could not be reconstructed. I poured a glass of whiskey and stood by the balcony. The city stretched below, indifferent. The skyline was the same, but my perception had changed. Security, loyalty, and power were never absolute. They were conditional, and inside my home, where I had believed both were guaranteed, the illusion had shattered. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel relief. I felt clarity, cold and steady. I had protected what mattered most, the integrity of the systems I built. The betrayal had been exposed. The consequences were enacted, and now the house and I were left with the aftermath, heavy but undramatic. I would continue my life quietly. My routines, my schedules, my work all continued. The city, the empire, the household, each remained under control. But something within me had changed. Observation had replaced trust. Silence had replaced comfort. And I knew that the quiet weight of betrayal was heavier than any shout, stronger than any threat, and far more enduring than any fleeting satisfaction. The maid moved past me with a small, respectful nod. I returned it without comment. Everything had returned to its place, yet nothing felt the same. Silence remained, and in that silence I understood the cost of everything I had overlooked. The house was mine again in form, but the quiet truth was unyielding, and that truth would remain.